He traded the house she built for a woman who hadn't even seen the foundation. And her quiet response? It shattered everything he thought he owned. Welcome back to Mr. Charles Stories, where true power speaks softly and dignity never needs to shout. Let me ask you, have you ever given someone everything, only to watch them offer it to someone else like it meant nothing? Have you ever sacrificed your peace, your purpose, your plans, all in the name of love, only to realize you were never even consulted when the final decision was made? Stay with me, because this story isn't about revenge. It's about how grace can destroy a man louder than anger ever could. If you believe there's strength in walking away with your head held. Hi, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe right now. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter. Before her name floated through New York society brunches and foundation events, before her story trended on podcasts and online op-eds, Kamira Wynn was a woman who knew how to live small and live well. Her apartment had creaky floors. Her fridge whirred at night. She hand-washed delicates and reused grocery bags. She brewed her coffee in a French press and used milk frothers with chipped handles. She also worked a job most people ignored, grant writing for a non-profit. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't headline-worthy. But it meant something to her. She found funding for schools and youth programs. She kept kids off the streets, built budgets from nothing, and celebrated every small win. At the time, she thought love would be just as honest, just as deliberate, just as earned. And then Kieran Ashford entered her orbit. It was the annual Urban Education Tech Gala, a blending of Silicon Valley thinkers and East Coast philanthropists. Kamira was there to work. Her team was short-staffed. She handled vendor calls, coordinated lighting checks, and managed seat arrangements. Kieran arrived late. He wasn't loud. He didn't dominate the room. He floated through it. In a fitted navy suit and a calm, steady presence, he paused by the oars, Derv's table, and made a comment about the lighting needing warmth. Kamira overheard and offered him a polite correction. The lighting was intentional, designed to keep attention on the main presentation screen. He turned to her and smiled. You noticed that? That was their first conversation. Not about money, not about status, about lighting temperature and audience psychology. He introduced himself only as Kieran. She didn't even realize who he was until one of the event chairs whispered, "That's Ashford Capital's youngest partner." Quiet shark. He didn't ask her out traditionally. He invited her to a post-event dinner where donors would be present. It was upscale, intimidating, and entirely foreign to her. Still, she went. That night, he didn't spend time trying to win her over. He included her, asked for her thoughts, noticed when her water glass was empty, introduced her as someone brilliant with details. From there, the pace was fast but never forceful. Dinners turned to brunches. Brunches turned into weekends. She found herself at his condo more than her own. His world was full of silent elevators, shoes that cost more than rent, and conversations about startup acquisition deals she had to Google. But with him, it felt safe, intentional. When he offered her a drawer, she laughed. When he offered her a closet, she paused. When he handed her keys and said, "Stay whenever you want," she didn't think twice. After 9 months, Kamira officially left her job. The decision felt like peeling skin, uncomfortable and raw. Her director cried. Her co-workers hosted a goodbye lunch with budget pasta and cupcakes. She left with a box of things and a quiet ache. Kieran said, "You've outgrown it. Time to stretch." And so, she became a full-time partner in his world. She learned how to speak fluent boardroom small talk, how to hold her wine glass with her left so her right was always available to shake hands. She stopped second-guessing how she dressed. She started carrying cards, personal, minimal, cream embossed. At charity events, she was no longer the one organizing. She was seated in the front, greeted by name, admired for her elegance. It came quietly, no ribbon, no announcement. Just a thick envelope slid across the counter one morning as she made coffee. Inside was the deed. A new house in Rye, New York, on the water, secluded, modern. Sunlight carved through glass walls. The kind of place where silence hummed instead of screamed. "This is your home now," he said. "Build it the way you want." Camilla blinked. "Anything?" she asked. He nodded. "All yours." And she believed him. Camilla didn't just decorate. She designed. She visited suppliers herself. She ran her hand along marble slabs, rejected tiles that looked too cold, sampled rugs until one felt like it could hold her secrets. She walked through the empty house barefoot each week, checking progress, talking to the contractors by name, making notes in a leather-bound book she kept tucked under her arm. This wasn't just shelter. This was her love story set in stone. She made that house feel like warmth. The guest bedroom was for her nieces. The reading nook held her favorite poetry volumes. The kitchen had a coffee station he didn't even use, but she insisted it be perfect. The master bedroom was theirs, or so she thought. That housewarming night was magic. Dozens of guests, soft piano, wine that tasted like summer. She wore navy silk and kissed cheeks, laughed when people asked if she'd studied interior design. She felt whole, like she'd finally arrived, not at a destination of wealth, but a destination of belonging. But wealth, as she would soon learn, does not equal loyalty, and belonging doesn't guarantee respect. The housewarming had barely cooled before the whispers began. It started with glances. At first, she thought she was imagining it. A subtle exchange between two women at a gala. A too long pause from a florist when Camilla mentioned Kieran's name. A hairstylist who hesitated when asking if she still lived in Rye. Camilla was raised to lead with grace, not suspicion. She didn't accuse. She didn't snoop. Instead, she buried the unease under busy schedules and charity planning. After all, she had a reputation now, and expectations to meet. But the signs didn't stop. A gala coordinator accidentally sent her an RSVP list with +1 Talitha Rowe next to Kieran's name. She thought it was a mistake. She thought maybe Talitha was an assistant, an intern, a planner. But then she started hearing the name more often. "Oh, Talitha was just here." I think Talitha helped pick that lamp. Kieran and Talitha were spotted at. Each time, it stung a little more. It was a quiet Thursday. Camilla had returned from a spa event early. The house was supposed to be empty. She planned to water the orchids, go over press materials, and sip wine by the fireplace before Kieran got back from DC. The front door was unlocked. She didn't panic. She figured the cleaning staff had come by. But when she stepped into the foyer, she heard movement upstairs. Not cleaning, dragging, furniture being moved. She climbed the stairs slowly, heart pounding harder with each step. She reached the bedroom, their bedroom, and stopped. Inside was a woman she had never seen in person, barefoot and casually humming, pushing a marble side table across the floor. One of the dressers was open. Camilla's scarves were tossed aside. Her perfume bottles had been pushed to the edge of the counter. And on the bed, a box, half unpacked, with fresh lingerie tags sticking out. Camilla didn't scream. She didn't ask who the woman was. She didn't ask where Kieran was. She just stood still. And that stillness, that terrifying calm, made the woman finally notice her. There was a pause. An awkward, frozen second. The woman blinked and said, "Oh, Kieran said you'd already moved out." Camilla blinked. Then she turned around, walked back downstairs, picked up her dog's leash, grabbed a weekend bag from the closet, and walked out the front door. She didn't slam it. She didn't break a thing. But something inside her cracked, so quietly, so cleanly, it would take weeks before Kieran even realized what he'd lost. She checked into the Carlisle. The doorman greeted her like royalty. No one asked questions. No one pried. She gave a different last name. She ordered a pot of jasmine tea, sat cross-legged on the bed, and stared at the untouched pillows. Her phone buzzed twice that night, both from Kieran. She didn't pick up. She didn't block him. She didn't write back. She didn't need to. Because at that moment, she realized something deeper than anger. He hadn't just given another woman her home. He had given away her presence, her effort, her identity, without permission, without hesitation. Kamira scrolled through her contacts slowly. She landed on a name she'd nearly forgotten. Mercy Kyle, a quiet, steel-willed attorney she'd met 2 years earlier at a Women in Finance benefit. They'd shared drinks. Kamira remembered her soft voice and sharp eyes. She called. "Mercy, I think I need to know everything." Mercy didn't ask questions. "Send me what you have," she said. "Deed copies, emails, texts. I'll find the rest." In 4 days, Mercy had built a binder thicker than Kamira's wedding album. Talitha Rowe wasn't just a woman. She was a client-turned-liability, an interior designer with a stylish resume and too much charm. She had accepted $300,000 from a wealthy client to renovate a penthouse. The client sued when the work was never delivered. Talitha had panicked. Kieran stepped in, and instead of settling the legal fire quietly with his own funds, he transferred Kamira's house, her anchor, into a holding company connected to Talitha's trust, using it as collateral to block seizure and minimize public scandal. No prenup clause protected Kamira. No conversation warned her. It was legal. It was fast. It was done. She didn't post online. She didn't break down to friends. She didn't leak it to tabloids. She called her tailor and asked for her most classic, understated black dress to be prepped. She told Mercy, "Don't stop him. Don't fight it. I want them both to think they've won." Then, she got ready for brunch. That weekend, the Ashford Foundation held a major fundraising brunch. Dozens of donors, city council members, socialites, former mayors. Kamira walked in alone. Her hair pulled back, pearl earrings. Nothing flashy, everything deliberate. Whispers rose like smoke. She greeted guests one by one. Then, as the press took photos, a board member leaned in and said gently, "We heard something about the house. We're so sorry." Kamira smiled, lifted her glass and said, "He traded my house to protect someone else's mistake." And then, after a sip of water, "I didn't deserve that." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. But the room fell quiet, not out of pity but respect, because every woman in that room had been dismissed once, and every man knew what was about to come next. "I didn't deserve that." Kamira didn't scream. She didn't point fingers. She didn't name names. But those 4 words, soft, direct, unsentimental, were louder than any scandal. They didn't just carry pain, they carried a mirror. One that every woman in that room recognized. One that left the men uncomfortable. One that needed no follow-up. And that's when the unraveling began. Kieran Ashford had built his name on silence. He wasn't the loud billionaire. He wasn't flashy with jets or mansions or celebrity circles. His brand was controlled elegance. The man who always knew more than he let on. The one you couldn't read. But silence becomes dangerous when someone else starts telling the story. Kamira's brunch moment became the story. The guests told their spouses. The spouses told their friends. The stylists whispered it in salons. "Did you hear? He sold her house to bail out his mistress." And in less than 72 hours, it landed in the inboxes of 2 journalists, one from a lifestyle site, the other from a quiet gossip blog that specialized in anonymous tips with receipts. Kamira didn't send a thing, but someone had, because people talk, especially when dignity walks into a room and stares betrayal in the face without blinking. Kieran found out the story had leaked during a strategy call with his legal team. They were reviewing a portfolio acquisition. His assistant stepped in, awkward, whispering something about an article going viral. He brushed it off until he opened his email. The subject line read, "Billionaire's wife says 4 words, and investors listen." His stomach turned. It wasn't the headline. It was the subtext. She didn't name him. She didn't need to. The article was brutal in its restraint. It laid out the facts subtly. A luxury property transferred quietly out of marital ownership, a known associate with a pending civil suit. Connected to the deal, a wife with no public comment, just one devastating sentence. Kieran closed the browser. But it was too late. His world didn't explode. It began to rot. Two of Kieran's investors called that afternoon, not to accuse, not to gossip, but to pause. "We'd like to freeze our capital allocation for fourth quarter," one said. "Just until this story clears." It wasn't about legality, it was about optics. "I don't want my name near that kind of coverage," the other admitted. "We trust you, but we can't carry heat like that." Kieran tried to explain. There was no scandal, no criminal activity. It was a personal restructure. But the calls kept coming. The board of one of his charitable partnerships scheduled a private ethics review. A CO chair from a major social fund emailed saying she was re-evaluating ongoing associations. Kieran threw his phone across the room. While his world buzzed with quiet panic, Camira was sitting in a small cafe in Fort Greene, stirring honey into her tea. No makeup, no press release, no need to explain. Mercy Kyle had advised her to stay quiet. Let the silence work for her. Camira agreed, because she didn't want revenge. She wanted understanding. She wanted people to know she hadn't walked away because she was weak, but because she had decided to stop shrinking herself for someone else's comfort. And the world, strangely, respected that. Talitha Rowe had been invisible until that moment. But with the article's rise, amateur sleuths started digging. It didn't take long. Bloggers found connections. Kieran's firm leasing a loft in Talitha's name, tagged photos at private. Events, a late-night emergency transfer of funds between holding companies tied to her business. Suddenly, her name was linked with fraud, design scam, favoritism, and house transfer in forums. Brands she worked with quietly removed her photo from their social pages. She was uninvited from a design expo in Miami. One tweet said it best: "You stole her house. She stole your silence. Now you're both out in the cold." Kieran tried to fix things. He called Camira 6 times. No answer. He sent her a typed letter through his assistant, offering to buy her a new property. She sent it back with a note. It was never about the house. "You know that." He booked a press meeting, then cancelled. He considered suing the bloggers, then realized discovery would reveal too much. Every step forward made the hole deeper. He had built his career on control. Now, he was losing it to someone who hadn't said more than a dozen words. Meanwhile, Camira's quiet poise drew admiration. She received invites to women's leadership panels. She was asked to co-host a gala for displaced women's shelters. One major media house offered her a book deal. She declined. She didn't want fame. She wanted direction. She was planning something Kieran couldn't stop. Camira didn't attend the board meeting where her name came up, but Mercy did. The Ashford Foundation had built its image around strong women, education, and public trust, and now its CEO founder had become a walking contradiction, not because of scandal, but because of silence. The board didn't need Camira to speak. Her absence said enough. When the vote came down, Kieran's seat was suspended indefinitely, pending a review of public perception alignment. He found out through a formal letter, not a call, not a meeting. His face flushed when he read it, not from shame, but from the kind of rage that can't find a target. Because the truth was, Camira hadn't pushed for it. She hadn't made a single move against him. But her restraint gave everyone else permission to draw their own lines. While Kieran paced around legal offices trying to contain his brand, Camira opened her windows to the spring air in Brooklyn and let the light in. She walked to the farmer's market on Saturdays. She bought her own almond milk again. And she slept better than she had in years. One morning, while returning from the florist with her arms full of tulips, she dropped one of the bundles on the brownstone steps. A man walking past stopped to help. He didn't stare. He didn't flirt. He just bent, picked up the flowers, and handed them to her. "You live here?" he asked, casual. Camira nodded. "Just moved in. Welcome," he said. "I'm across the street. Studio above the shop." She thanked him, smiled, and went inside. She didn't know his name yet, but something about his voice stayed with her all day. She Googled nothing about him, didn't search for his LinkedIn. She let it be what it was, an honest moment with no expectations. The next week, she ran into him again outside the corner cafe. He was reading a paperback and sipping something hot. He nodded toward her bouquet. "Another tulip day." She chuckled, trying to brighten the windows. "Want to join me?" he asked. And that's how Leo Maddox became a soft fixture in her days. Not intense, not persistent, just present, just kind. They talked about simple things: food, favorite authors, the way New York shifted in spring. He never asked what she used to do, never asked about her last name. He wasn't interested in her headlines. He was interested in her. On their fourth meeting, he showed her the rooftop above his studio. Potted herbs lined the wall. A small table sat under string lights, barely big enough for 2 plates. "I built this myself," he said, adjusting a chair for her. "Designing places that feel safe. That's my thing." She looked around and said, "You're good at it." He smiled, but it faded slowly. "You ever need to build something new, I'd be honored to help." The words caught her off guard, not because of how they sounded, but because of how they didn't try to fix her. That night, she didn't cry. She didn't plan. She just sat quietly and let herself feel everything she'd been ignoring for months. Kieran had built a fortress and called it a home. Leo built a rooftop and made it feel like peace. Meanwhile, Talitha was losing more contracts. Another client threatened legal action. Her name was now linked to 2 half-finished renovations, and design forums had flagged her as high risk. Kieran tried to call Kamira again. She finally picked up. He said, "You've made your point." She said, "I never tried to." He exhaled. "Are you proud of what you did?" She paused. "What did I do, Kieran?" "I left. I told the truth. You destroyed everything I worked for." "No," she said softly. "You gave that house away. I just walked out of it." He hung up. 2 days later, his PR team released a generic statement about personal matters and moving forward. But the public wasn't fooled, because no one forgets a story that begins with betrayal and ends with silence. At a garden fundraiser later that month, someone whispered, "That's her, the one with the house." Kamira turned and smiled politely. The woman leaned in. "You said 4 words. My sister left her marriage the next week." Kamira didn't react. She didn't need to. She had already moved on. That night, as she sat beside Leo under soft rooftop lights, he handed her a folded sketch. "What's this?" she asked. He shrugged. "A small space, south-facing, big windows, a place to grow things. Just an idea." She unfolded it. It was a 1-story home with an open kitchen, lots of bookshelves, and a porch swing. He said, "I wasn't sure if you were ready, but I wanted you to know, I don't want to build something for you. I want to build something with you." Kamira stared at the drawing, her chest warm and quiet. Kieran had bought her a house to own her. Leo was offering her a home to share. She didn't answer right away. She didn't have to, because healing isn't about rushing. It's about knowing you're finally somewhere safe enough to stand still. Have you ever watched someone try to fix a public mess they caused in private? Too late, too loud, and too wrong. If you've ever chosen silence over drama and still came out stronger, this story is for you. Drop a comment below. What would your 4 words be if someone crossed a line like that? Do you believe quiet dignity is more powerful than public revenge? Like, comment, and subscribe to Mr. Charles Stories, where true lessons come wrapped in real emotion. Your support keeps these stories alive. 3 weeks after Kieran's empire began to crack, a new name started surfacing in quiet circles. Kamira, not as someone's wife, not as the woman who walked away, but as the woman who said 4 words and changed everything. She hadn't spoken to any journalist. She hadn't posted a statement or sat for a podcast, but people were speaking for her. Bloggers called her the whisper that ruined him. Twitter threads analyzed her poise like it was political strategy. Women in law firms, university campuses, even high school classrooms quoted her phrase like a rally cry. "I didn't deserve that." It became more than a statement. It became permission. Kamira didn't want any of it. Not the attention, not the pity, not the applause. She wanted to move forward, but not by stepping over the ruins of what she'd left behind. She wanted to build something that mattered. That's when she started writing, not a blog post, not a memoir, a plan, a real, tangible structure that would outlive the gossip. She remembered something from years ago, before Kieran, before the house in Rye. She used to volunteer at a transitional housing non-profit on weekends. Women came in with nothing but bags, children, and exhaustion. Some had fled abuse. Others had been erased in divorce courts. A few just ran out of money when their husbands left and locked the accounts. She remembered one woman clearly, Nia, a mother of 3. Her husband had filed for bankruptcy and skipped town. Creditors showed up at their apartment with notices and threats. She had no lease in her name, no savings, no car. Her youngest had asthma. Her oldest was 13 and already angry at the world. Kamira had sat with Nia for hours, helped fill out the forms, helped her find shoes that fit from the shelter donations pile, listened as she cried and said again and again, "But the house had my curtains in it. I made it a home. Doesn't that count for something?" Kamira never forgot that. And now she realized the betrayal she had endured wasn't just personal. It was systemic. It was built into the way homes were owned, sold, and taken, often by men, who never had to ask permission because legally they never needed it. She didn't want revenge. She wanted protection, structure, strategy. She called mercy. "I want to start a fund," she said, "one that helps women like Nia. Like me." Mercy didn't ask a single question. She just said, "I'll handle the filings. You focus on the message." And so she did. Kamira named it the Win Foundation, after her grandmother, the woman who taught her how to save grocery receipts, balance checkbooks, and read financial journals with a pencil in hand. The logo was simple, a lowercase w inside the outline of a house. Nothing bold, nothing trendy, just safe, clean, permanent. The mission: to provide housing grants, legal advocacy, and emergency funding for women leaving marriages or partnerships where financial power had been used to control, erase, or trap them. It wasn't a shelter, it was a springboard. Kamira funded the first $500,000 herself, using an inheritance her grandmother had left her that she'd never touched. She didn't use a PR firm. She didn't hire a social media team. But when one of the early board members, a woman from the brunch who had watched Kamira speak, with such quiet strength, posted about the initiative on LinkedIn, the internet did the rest. A small headline appeared on a respected women's finance blog: "Wife who walked away launches housing fund for women in crisis." It trended in under 6 hours. The post received 7,000 shares in 2 days. Articles followed, then donations, then interviews. But Kamira declined every press request. She wasn't doing this to be seen. She was doing it so others wouldn't be forgotten. Kieran saw the article on a flight. He blinked hard when he saw her photo beside the headline. She was standing in front of a brownstone, holding papers in one hand and looking away from the camera. He felt something twist in his gut. He couldn't tell if it was guilt or fear. Because she wasn't just surviving, she was building. Without him, without needing his name, without needing revenge. He read the article 3 times. It never mentioned his name once. It didn't need to. He closed the laptop and stared out the window, watching the city disappear under clouds. That night, when he got to his apartment, Talitha was sitting on the couch with a drink. Her phone screen glowed with the same article. She didn't speak at first. Then she said, "Do you think she'll ever tell everything?" Kieran replied, "She doesn't have to." Talitha stood, drained her glass and said, "Well, I hope your empire was worth her house." In Brooklyn, Kamira stood in her kitchen, watching water boil for tea. Her phone lit up with another email from Mercy. A foundation in Boston wanted to partner. A divorce recovery group in Atlanta had requested materials. A tech donor from Seattle had sent in a $100,000 check and wanted no recognition. She put the phone down. She poured her tea, and she sat in silence, letting herself feel Not overwhelmed, not proud, not even victorious, just grounded. The kind of feeling she hadn't known in years. Later that evening, Lior stopped by. He brought her a small brown notebook. "What's this?" she asked, smiling. "It's blank," he said. "But I thought, maybe it's time you write your own blueprints." He didn't stay long. Just a cup of tea and quiet company. Before he left, he stood at the doorway and said, "I know you're doing this for others, but I hope you realize this is part of your healing too." Camira nodded, then closed the door gently behind him. The next morning, she wrote one sentence at the top of the notebook page. It wasn't just a house. She underlined it, then turned the page and kept writing. "Let me know when you're ready for Chapter 3, Part 2. Camira had no interest in becoming a symbol. Every message that flooded her inbox praised her silence, her grace, her strength. But what most didn't understand was that she hadn't been trying to inspire anyone. She had simply been surviving in the only way that didn't cost her soul. Now she was building something, but it wasn't a comeback. It wasn't a brand. It was a foundation in the truest sense, a place women could start again without begging, without shame, without explaining themselves to men in suits who never asked how they ended up sleeping in a car after 10 years of marriage. The WIN Foundation received over 300 emails in its first 2 weeks. Women told stories that mirrored hers. One had lost a home because her name wasn't on the loan. Another was forced to sign over property after her ex-husband threatened to pull custody support. One wrote, "He said it was his because he paid for it. But I was the one who lived there, who kept it clean, who painted the nursery." What about that? Camira read each one. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She just kept reading. And she remembered how many times she had doubted herself after walking away. Not because she regretted it, but because the world was so good at making women second-guess their strength. When it wasn't loud, when it wasn't packaged for revenge, when it wasn't burning down the building. She hadn't burned anything. She had walked out and let the building fall on its own. And now, she was offering shelter for those still trapped inside. That afternoon, she called Lior and asked if he wanted to come by for dinner. He said yes without hesitation. She made lemon chicken, brown rice, and sautéed greens. Nothing fancy, no wine, just soft jazz playing low in the background and a candle flickering on the kitchen counter. He arrived in a charcoal hoodie and jeans, carrying a loaf of fresh sourdough and a bottle of homemade chili oil. "You cooked," he said, surprised but pleased. She smiled. "I wanted to say thank you." "For what?" "For not asking about things when you knew better than to." He nodded, placing the bread down. Some things don't need to be picked open. They just need space to rest. They ate in easy silence. Halfway through the meal, she looked up and said, "I used to cook a lot, but somewhere along the way, I stopped." "Because of him?" he asked carefully. "No," she said, "because everything I did felt like it had to be performative. Even dinner. Everything had to impress someone or prove I was worthy of the life I was given. And now," she took a breath, "now it just feels like me again." After dinner, they washed dishes side by side. He dried as she rinsed. Their movements matched like they had done it before, not in this kitchen, but maybe in another life. When they were done, he didn't rush to leave. He leaned against the counter and asked, "What's the next step for the foundation?" She glanced toward her notebook on the table. "I want to build transitional units, not shelters, actual homes, studio apartments, clean, quiet, with light, a place that doesn't feel like they've already lost everything." He nodded slowly. "You ever think about designing them with me?" Camira tilted her head. "You mean you'd work with me on it?" "I'd love to," he said, "but only if it stays yours. I don't want to take it over. I just want to help build what you already see." No one had ever said that to her. Not in those words. Not with that kind of clarity. Not even Kieran, who had always given her the illusion of choice without the weight of it. "I'd like that," she said quietly. He nodded, his eyes steady. And then, in a rare shift of air between them, he asked, "Do you ever miss him?" Camira didn't answer right away. She walked to the window, looked out at the streetlights blinking through the bare tree branches and said, "I miss who I thought he was, but I don't miss the way I felt around him. I don't miss walking on glass. Was it always like that?" "No," she said, "but I think it started the moment I became something he needed to manage rather than protect." Lior stayed silent. Because some truths don't need answers, only space. When he left, he touched her hand lightly at the door, not asking for more, not pressing for next steps, just presence. Kamira stood at the threshold long after the door closed, the warmth of his touch still lingering like heat from the oven after it's been turned off. She turned off the lights, climbed into bed, and pulled the covers up to her chin. Sleep came easier that night. Elsewhere in Manhattan, Kieran sat alone in his penthouse, staring at a spreadsheet that refused to balance itself. 2 more investors had pulled out. A partnership was frozen. He still had wealth, still had lawyers, still had power. But influence? That was bleeding, and influence was what kept the empire standing. He knew it wasn't just the foundation, it was the silence. The way Kamira had never once tried to ruin him, but had still managed to become a mirror none of his circles wanted to look into. He opened his phone, stared at the last message he had sent her. "You won." He had sent it 2 nights ago. There was no reply, not even a read receipt. He typed again, "Can we talk?" He hovered over send, deleted it, typed again, "Do you miss me?" Deleted it again. This wasn't her war. She hadn't even stepped onto the battlefield. She'd simply removed herself from the equation, and now the numbers weren't adding up. He shut his phone off and walked to the window. The city below buzzed with life, indifference, and progress, all things that no longer revolved around him. Kamira arrived early to the morning board meeting. It wasn't for the foundation. This one was different. She'd been invited to consult with a mid-sized real estate non-profit, considering a city-backed grant program for transitional housing. They'd read about her initiative. One of the directors had watched her quietly from a distance during her Ashford Foundation years and admired how she handled pressure without folding. Now they wanted her insight. She hadn't accepted right away, but after reading through their proposal and seeing how deeply underfunded their programs were for women over 35, she agreed to sit down. The building was in Lower Manhattan, old, narrow, crowded with intention but not Polish. The chairs didn't match. The coffee machine wheezed. The woman who greeted her was warm but tired. Kamira felt at home. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. They spent 2 hours discussing zoning, financing, public-private partnerships, and how to design units that gave privacy and safety without making the women feel like case files. When one of the project leads asked how she would pitch this to donors, Kamira leaned in and said, "You don't pitch it. You tell the truth, that most women don't end up homeless because they're irresponsible. They end up there because they were erased by someone else's decisions." The room went quiet. Then heads nodded. A young intern scribbled that line in her notebook. Afterward, the director pulled Kamira aside and said, "It's rare to meet someone who speaks like they're not trying to impress the room." Kamira smiled. "I stopped performing a long time ago." The director offered a permanent advisory seat on their development board. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She said, "Let me think about it." Because now, she didn't rush anymore. She chose. Back in Brooklyn, she stopped by a tiny bookstore to pick up a gift for Lior. A design anthology she'd seen him reading months ago but had never finished. The clerk wrapped it in brown paper with a string bow. She passed by a newsstand on her way home. A tabloid headline caught her eye. "Ashford plus Rowe split? Sources say she vanished." Kamira blinked. She bought the paper out of habit, then paused. Why did she care? She hadn't searched Kieran's name in weeks, hadn't mentioned him, hadn't thought about Talitha Rowe in longer. She opened the paper and scanned the article. Anonymous sources. Speculation. No statements. But the detail that stood out, Talitha had left town. No one knew where she'd gone. Her business accounts had been quietly deactivated. Her website now redirected to a blank white page. Kieran had been seen attending events alone, no updates. No explanations. It wasn't vindication. It wasn't even satisfying. It just was. She folded the paper and tossed it in a street bin. On the walk home, she thought about how differently her life moved now. Her pace was slower. Her steps were firmer. Her thoughts clearer. She didn't orbit anyone. She stood still and let others choose their distance. That evening, she handed Lior the book. He smiled wide and turned it over in his hands like a gift he didn't expect to deserve. They sat on the rooftop, eating grilled vegetables and lemon couscous. The sky was still pink when he looked over and asked, "You feel it?" "Feel what?" This shift. "You seem lighter lately." She considered it. "Not lighter," she said, "more centered, like I'm finally standing in my own name again." Lior nodded slowly. "That's a good place to build from." He took her hand gently. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. The warmth between them was slower than passion, deeper than desire. It was safety. Kamira closed her eyes and let herself rest in it. Across the city, Kieran was having dinner alone in a glass-walled penthouse. The table had 6 chairs. Only one was filled. He picked at roasted duck and stared at his untouched wine. His phone was face down. No notifications, no noise. He hadn't seen Talitha in 2 weeks. She'd taken a flight without leaving a note. The apartment he rented for her sat dark. Her messages were brief, cold, transactional. She didn't even ask for more money. She just left. His assistant had been fielding inquiries about business partnerships, all of them hesitant now. The scandal wasn't fire anymore. It was smoke, lingering, smothering. Everyone who stood too close to him walked away coughing. He called a PR consultant who once owed him a favor. She picked up and said, "I can't help you unless she talks." "She won't," Kieran replied. "She doesn't want to." The consultant laughed once, dry and low. "Then you're done." He hung up, poured the wine, didn't drink it. Instead, he opened his laptop, opened Kamira's foundation website. She was still listed as director. Her mission statement was 4 lines. Each one hit harder than the last. He closed the screen, because reading her truth was harder than fighting the lies. Kamira woke early the next morning, her body still wrapped in the soft calm of the previous night. The sky outside was pale, the kind of pre-dawn blue that only stayed for a few minutes before light claimed the city. She brewed her tea, turned off her phone, and sat near the window with her notebook, the one Lior had given her weeks ago. The pages were beginning to fill, not with journal entries, but with frameworks, diagrams, names, ideas. She was no longer trying to heal from the past. She was preparing to protect others from repeating it. By the time the sun broke across the buildings, she had drafted the layout for a pilot program. 6 transitional units across 2 boroughs. Clean, accessible, temporary homes with built-in legal support and on-site counseling. Each one would include basic furnishing, pantry staples, and a lockbox safe only the woman could access. No bunk beds, no assigned curfews, no broken radiators, and no questions about who she had once belonged to. Later that morning, she met with an urban housing developer at a quiet midtown cafe. He had been skeptical at first, said things like market conditions and donor fatigue, until Kamira spoke. She didn't pitch. She didn't oversell. She simply said, "Every time a woman walks away from a house her name wasn't on, she's reminded that love didn't protect her. Structure does." He said nothing for a full minute, then nodded once and said, "I'm in." The meeting ran long. By the time she left, her shoulders were tight, but her mind was clear. She had moved past the stage of reacting. Now she was building, and she was building with women in mind, not as survivors, but as planners, founders, and owners. That afternoon, she met Lior at a community design exhibit. His architecture firm had a small booth showcasing their work with low-impact urban housing. She stood beside him, watching people admire the models. "You built these?" one woman asked, eyes wide. Lior smiled modestly. "It's a team effort. But yes, Kamira stood close, quiet, steady. She didn't need to stand out here. She liked watching him take pride in his work, not with arrogance, but intention. When the crowd thinned, Lior turned to her and said, "You inspire me." She arched a brow. "How?" "Because you don't fight, you plant." That made her pause. She wasn't used to compliments like that. Not ones that saw her clearly. Not ones that didn't sound like claims. They walked the exhibit for an hour, hand brushing hand, but never fully clasped. That wasn't the energy between them. Not yet. It was patience, trust, nearness. Outside, he offered to walk her home. She accepted. Halfway there, she stopped. "Do you know what I miss most?" she asked. Lior tilted his head. "What?" "Safety," she said. "Not in the physical sense. I always had locks, gates, cameras, but emotional safety. The kind that doesn't make you feel like you're one argument away from being erased." He nodded slowly. "I think everyone craves that." Kamira met his eyes. "Do you feel safe around me?" "Yes," he said, without flinching. She took his hand this time, and didn't let go. At home, her phone buzzed again. An email from Kieran. The subject line was one word: closure. She almost didn't open it, but curiosity nudged her. Inside, it was short. "Kamira, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know. I see it now. You didn't destroy me. I was already undoing myself. Thank you for not finishing the job, Kay." She stared at the message for a long time. Not because it hurt, but because it didn't. She didn't reply. She archived it, and that was that. In the following days, the foundation began receiving real funding. The tech donor from Seattle committed another $250,000. A former mayor reached out about integrating the program into a statewide pilot. Kamira's accountant called to ask if she wanted to set up a hiring pipeline. And through it all, she remained grounded. She had finally built something her ex-husband couldn't take, something no mistress could step into, something no investor could rename. A legacy rooted not in the house he gave her, but in the women she was giving homes to. One of the final moments that week came unexpectedly. She was visiting a shelter the foundation had partnered with when she saw a woman staring out the window with a toddler in her arms. Kamira greeted her softly. "Hi." The woman turned. Her eyes were tired, but not empty. "You're the lady from the story," she said. Kamira smiled faintly. "Which one?" "The one with the house, the one who said the thing." Kamira raised a brow. "What thing?" The woman repeated it quietly. "I didn't deserve that." And then she added, "I've been saying it in my head every night. It helps." Kamira swallowed hard. She reached into her purse, pulled out a card, and wrote something on the back. "Call this number when you're ready," she said. "We'll have a place for you, one with your name on it." The woman clutched the card like it was gold, and for the first time in years, Kamira felt like everything she had lost had led her to this exact doorway. Not to rebuild what she once had, but to become the woman she never knew she needed to be. Kamira never thought she'd step into a courthouse again. But on the third Friday of April, she found herself walking through the marble entryway of the downtown Manhattan family law building, not for her own case, but to sit beside a woman she'd never met in person. Her name was Nadia. She was 39, a mother of 2, and had escaped a controlling marriage, where the house, car, and bank accounts had all been under her husband's name. The same story, different wardrobe. Her face was quiet, not tearful, a calm that always came after weeks of surviving. Kamira had read her file. The foundation had provided emergency shelter for Nadia and helped secure pro bono legal support. But today was about the custody arrangement and securing her right to keep her children with her in the transitional housing space. Nadia had asked Kamira, "Will you come with me? I just need someone in the room who isn't trying to win anything." Kamira said yes without hesitation. She sat beside Nadia that morning, not as a founder or director, as a witness, a symbol of what it meant to not be alone. The courtroom was quiet, stale. the kind of place where voices were too formal and humanity too thin. Kamira watched the opposing attorney try to paint Nadia as unstable, financially fragile, and emotionally unpredictable. She said nothing, but her silence wasn't passive. It was anchored. When Nadia was asked to speak, her voice didn't shake. She spoke clearly. She said, "I may not have the same money, but my children know my warmth. They know my voice. They know I don't leave them wondering if they'll still be wanted tomorrow." Kamira looked down at her notebook and wrote, "Real stability isn't money, it's presence." When the session ended, Nadia won temporary custody. The final ruling was postponed, but this was the first victory. Outside, under the building's stone archway, Nadia turned and hugged her. Kamira stiffened at first. She wasn't used to that kind of embrace anymore. Spontaneous, wordless, true. But then, she softened, returned it. "Let it settle." Nadia pulled back and said, "Thank you. Not for the foundation, for sitting next to me. You reminded me I'm not invisible." Kamira nodded, and for the first time that day, she felt the full weight of what her life had become. Not loud, not public, but purposeful. That evening, she walked back to her brownstone, feet sore and mind tired. She let herself in, fed her dog, and took a long shower. She was standing in her robe, towel wrapping her hair when the doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone. She peeked through the small glass panel and saw Leo holding 2 takeout bags and a bottle of sparkling water. When she opened the door, he held them up with a crooked grin. "You didn't reply to my text. I figured that meant you forgot to eat." She exhaled a laugh, stepped aside, and let him in. They sat on the couch, containers of Thai food spread between them. Leo passed her a fork, then asked, "You okay?" She nodded. "Just a long day." He waited, not pressing. Kamira eventually said, "I was in court today. Not for me. For someone we're helping." He looked at her gently. "How did it go?" She held her own. The judge gave her temporary custody. She paused, but being back in that space, it reminded me how quickly people in power are willing to erase you with a smile. Leo set his food down. "You didn't let them erase you." "I almost did," she said, voice low. "I don't think I would have found my footing if I hadn't left when I did." "Then maybe," he said, "what you're building now isn't just for them. Maybe it's still part of you finding balance." She looked at him, her expression soft but steady. "I think I'm still learning how to be safe inside my own life." Leo nodded, "And I'm willing to be part of that learning. If you'll let me." Later that night, as he walked to the door to leave, she stopped him. "You don't have to go." He looked surprised. "Are you sure?" She nodded once. And that's how he stayed, not as a guest, not as a lover, as someone who knew how to be present without taking up the whole room. They sat on the couch again, watching nothing in particular on the screen. Kamira curled up under a throw. Leo draped an arm gently around her shoulders, not possessive, just near. Eventually, she rested her head on his chest, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't need the silence to feel safe. She just needed him there. Kamira woke before the sun, the soft rhythm of Leo's breathing still steady beside her. It wasn't romantic in the grand gesture sense. There were no whispered confessions or rushed promises, just stillness, a kind she hadn't known in years, the kind that didn't demand anything from her in return. She slipped out of bed quietly, wrapped herself in her robe, and moved to the kitchen. She poured coffee, leaned against the counter, and stared out at the quiet Brooklyn street as it began to stretch and yawn into a new day. The headlines had finally quieted. Her name wasn't trending. Kieran hadn't sent another email. Talitha's silence had become permanent. It was like the storm had passed, but instead of wreckage, it left clarity. Kamira didn't want revenge. She wanted reach, and now she had it. Later that morning, she met with a city housing commissioner. They had invited her to discuss incorporating Wynn Foundation's pilot units into a public-private model across 3 boroughs. The commissioner was polite but skeptical, especially about giving so. much weight to a foundation that had only been live for a few months. "You've had a lot of attention," he said, glancing at her bio printout. "Some think your story is what's driving this momentum, not the model." Camira didn't flinch. "My story gave me the idea," she said, "but the model will stand with or without it." He leaned back in his chair. "And if your name disappears from headlines, then the headlines will finally catch up to the women we're trying to serve," she answered. "Which is exactly what I want." The man studied her, then said, "We'll need a pilot report by the end of next quarter, transparent numbers. No fluff." "You'll have it," she said. After the meeting, she walked several blocks before calling Mercy. "They're testing us," she said. "They should," Mercy replied. "If it were easy, someone would have done it already." Camira smiled. Mercy always had a way of grounding her. She was the rare kind of support who never padded the truth, never softened hard realities, but she always made Camira feel like the ground under her feet wouldn't give out. "We'll need to get the legal side airtight," Camira added. "Every tenant agreement, every zoning variance, they'll look for cracks." "I've already started drafting the templates," Mercy replied. "You focus on the people. I'll handle the paper." That evening, Camira came home to find Lior in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, a pot of pasta simmering on the stove. She dropped her keys on the counter. "You cook?" "I survive," he said. "And I know you skip meals when you're stressed." She leaned against the doorway, watching him. "I met with the commissioner today. Good. Better than expected. We're moving faster than we planned." He stirred the pot gently. "You ready for that?" "I think I've been ready," she said. "I just didn't know it until now." Dinner was quiet, comforting. After they ate, Lior showed her a sketch he'd been working on, a concept for the foundation's first transitional building. Wide common areas, private kitchens, safe corners, natural light. No one-size-fits-all layouts. Each unit had variations, options. Camira ran her finger along one edge of the drawing. "This feels like dignity. That's what I was aiming for." She looked up at him, eyes warm. "Can we submit this for the pilot units?" "It's yours," he said. The next few weeks moved in waves. The foundation secured 2 buildings for renovation. A team of volunteers, many of them women who had once been in shelter programs themselves, signed on to help. Camira visited every site personally. She walked through the rooms, measured where light hit, asked how the doors sounded when closed, insisted on insulation, high locks, sturdy kitchen tiles. "This isn't a makeover," she told the contractors. "This is someone's restart. Treat it like that." She made notes on every exit route, checked every lock herself. One contractor asked, "You always this hands-on?" She replied, "I've slept in a house I didn't feel safe in. Never again. Not on my watch." One day, during a planning session at a build site, a woman named Tammy pulled her aside. Tammy had joined as a volunteer after receiving emergency help from Wynn Foundation just months earlier. She held Camira's hand tightly and said, "I used to think starting over meant you had to lose everything. But this feels like gaining something new." Camira felt her throat tighten. Tammy added, "I never saw myself as more than someone who survived, until you made space for me to work again." Camira didn't say much. She just nodded, and made a note to call a friend who ran a job placement program. She wanted Tammy hired, not helped, empowered. By the end of the month, Camira stood in the first finished unit. No furniture yet, no tenant assigned, but the bones were good. She ran her hand along the window frame, felt the weight of the door, and took a breath. Lior walked in behind her. "She's beautiful," he said. "She's possible," Camira corrected. He took her hand. "You ever think you'd get here?" She exhaled. "No, but I think every moment I thought I was breaking. It was just this version of me trying to come through." They stood together in that room, the sunlight stretching between them, and didn't speak for a long time. Because sometimes healing doesn't come with speeches. It comes with finished walls, strong locks, and keys handed to women who thought they'd never hold one again. Kamira sat on the stoop of her Brooklyn brownstone, her elbows resting on her knees, a notebook in her lap, and a mug of lukewarm coffee by her foot. The spring air was brisk but not biting. Birds were louder than usual. Morning traffic hummed in the distance, but none of it felt urgent. Across the street, Lior was kneeling by a row of planter boxes outside his studio. He was barefoot, sleeves rolled to his elbows, gently turning soil. She smiled as she watched him. There was something sacred about how he moved. No rush, no wasted effort. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't building toward a brand. He was just present. Kamira didn't interrupt. She let the stillness settle. In the notebook, she had scribbled dozens of names over the past hour. Not names of donors or partners, women. Names of the first 10 applicants approved for the Foundation's transitional program. She'd reviewed every profile herself. Each name carried a story she'd memorized, not because she had to, but because she needed to remember who this was all for. Kira, 43, lost everything in a mortgage fraud dispute after divorce. Valentina, 27, fled with her daughter from a fiancé who locked her phone in a drawer every night. Nadine, 51, hadn't opened her own bank account in over 20 years. Kamira circled each name in red, not to highlight them, but to claim them, to mark them as hers to protect. These were women who hadn't been heard in rooms that claimed to care. But Kamira wasn't building a room. She was building a whole new floor beneath them, so they wouldn't fall again. Later that afternoon, she visited the first completed unit to do a quiet walkthrough. No press, no donors, no photos, just her. She stepped into the small apartment and let the silence greet her. The walls were warm beige. The curtains were thick enough to block unwanted views, but soft enough to let in natural light. The kitchen had a full stove, not a hot plate. The bathroom had a cabinet for products, not just a mirror. She opened every drawer, tested every faucet. She walked into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. For a moment, she closed her eyes. She imagined what it would feel like to unlock that door for the first time, to walk into safety that didn't come with terms or expiration dates. A key, a name on the lease, a drawer of your own. She opened her eyes. This was the beginning. As she left the unit, her phone buzzed. A text from Lior. Dinner on the roof tonight? No pressure, just good food. She typed back quickly. I'll bring dessert. That evening, the rooftop was quiet except for the soft buzz of jazz playing from a speaker tucked in the corner. Lior had set up a small table with 2 plates of seared salmon, wild rice, and grilled asparagus. The sky was lavender. She handed him a paper bag. Inside, warm cinnamon rolls from the bakery 2 blocks over, his favorite. He smiled without saying anything and pulled out a chair for her. They ate quietly, their movements easy, the silence between them warm instead of stiff. After the meal, Lior leaned back and looked out over the city. You ever feel like none of this makes sense? He asked. Kamira tilted her head. What do you mean? All of it. Life. Love. The way things break. The way they sometimes come back together. She thought for a moment. I used to think healing was a straight line, she said. That I just had to get over it and move on. But now, I think it's more like tide and sand. It comes, it recedes, it pulls things away. But it also brings things back. Lior turned to her. What's come back for you? Kamira exhaled. My voice, my clarity, and maybe trust. He nodded slowly. I want to be careful with that. She looked at him. You have been... They didn't kiss that night. They didn't make plans. But when she left, she took his hand as they walked downstairs. And for the first time in years, she didn't question whether someone would let go first. 3 days later, Kamira received a letter in the mail. Handwritten, no return address. She knew the handwriting immediately. It was from Kieran. She stared at it for a while on the kitchen counter before opening it. Not because she was afraid of what he'd say, but because she no longer felt any urgency to respond to him. He was a chapter already closed. Still, curiosity tugged. She opened the envelope carefully, unfolded the thick paper, and read, "Kamira, I don't know if this letter will land in your hands, or if it will just disappear into the echo of the choices I made. I won't ask you for forgiveness. I know better than that. But I need you to understand something I never said out loud. I didn't trade the house because I didn't love you. I traded it because I didn't know what love was supposed to cost. You gave me something I thought I deserved, without ever asking what you needed in return. And I took advantage of that silence. I ruined the one thing that made me better, your trust. I know what you've built now. I see it. The world sees it. And while it hurts to be on the outside, I'm not writing to win you back. I just wanted you to know I've never respected anyone more than I respect you now. Take care of yourself. K. Kamira folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Then she slid it into the back of her kitchen drawer, next to old takeout menus and recipes she never used anymore. Not out of sentiment, but because she'd stopped deleting things that no longer held power over her. Let it sit. Let it fade. Let it rest. Later that morning, she visited a new site in Queens, an old duplex that was being converted into 2 separate transitional units. The structure needed more work than the last, but the neighborhood was calm and the space had potential. The contractor walked her through the plans. She made notes on wall insulation, door reinforcement, and outdoor lighting. As she stepped into what would become the main bedroom of Unit B, she paused. The room was empty, stripped down to beams and wires, but the light hit just right. She stood still for a moment, picturing the woman who would someday sleep there. Maybe she'd have a son. Maybe she'd be fresh out of court. Maybe she'd be carrying years of silence. Kamira whispered, "She'll be safe here." Behind her, the contractor entered. "Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt." "It's okay," Kamira replied. "I was just imagining what this place will feel like when it finally breathes." That evening, she and Leo met for dinner at his place, a modest, lived-in studio above his workshop with big windows and paint-stained hardwood floors. He had cooked again. Something simple, garlic shrimp and buttered noodles with a side of greens. While they ate, Kamira asked, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we'd met earlier?" Leo looked at her thoughtfully. "Maybe. But I think we met exactly when we were supposed to." "Why?" "Because back then," he said, "I wasn't ready to be the kind of man you needed. And maybe you weren't ready to be with someone who didn't need to be impressed." Kamira smiled faintly. "That's fair." He leaned in slightly. "But I'm ready now. And I think you are too." She didn't say anything at first. Then she reached across the table and held his hand. "I think I'm finally ready to love someone without losing myself." Leo squeezed her hand gently. "And I promise you'll never have to give up yourself to stay close to me." Later that night, as they sat on the floor beside the couch, sipping tea and talking about nothing in particular, Kamira asked him, "What's your biggest fear?" He thought for a moment. "Waking up one day and realizing I built a life full of projects but not people." She nodded. "I used to think the projects would be enough, that if I did something meaningful it would fill the empty, and now I know meaning doesn't keep you warm," she said softly. "People do." Leo looked at her with quiet understanding. Then he said, "You're not empty anymore." "No," she agreed, "but I'm still learning what it feels like to be full." He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Then let's keep learning together." By the end of the week, the foundation had secured its 3rd building, a brownstone in the Bronx donated by a woman whose mother had been in an abusive marriage and died without ever owning a single thing in her name. "She would have loved what you're doing," the woman told Kamira. Kamira touched her hand and said, "Her story won't be forgotten." The next board meeting was the most emotional one yet. They went around the room, each person sharing why they had joined. When it was Kamira's turn, she simply said, "I lost a house, but I found a mission. And now I want to make sure no woman has to trade safety for silence again." There were no dry eyes in the room, because it wasn't about headlines anymore. It was about legacy, and she was no longer a woman who had been left. She was the woman building places no one could take away. Kamira stood in the middle of the new Bronx property on a Saturday morning. Clipboard in hand, sunlight stretching across the dust-covered floors. The space was older than their other units, original molding, creaky, stairs, a crooked sink in the upstairs hallway, but it had history, and she liked that. There was a worn strength in the walls, a weight that told her it had survived long before she came along, and would still be standing long after she was gone. She walked room to room, making notes with her pen. The living area would need soundproofing. The kitchen had good bones, just needed updated plumbing. Upstairs, the bedrooms were narrow but bright. Each corner she stepped into, she imagined the woman who'd live there. Her posture, her breath, her sleep, not curled in defense, but stretched in rest, at peace. She paused in the smallest bedroom, likely meant for a child, and leaned against the doorframe. Behind her, Lior's voice called gently, "Cam?" She turned. He was standing at the top of the stairs, sleeves rolled, a tape measure in one hand. "Everything okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Yeah, just feeling it." He stepped in beside her. "This room? All of it," she said. "How far we've come. How much more there is to do." Lior looked around. "This place will be strong when we're done. Not perfect, not shiny, but strong." Kamira smiled at that. "I'm okay with strong." After the walkthrough, they sat outside on the stoop with coffee and sandwiches from the deli down the street. A few neighborhood kids rode bikes past them on the sidewalk. One little girl stopped and pointed at the building. "Is that going to be a school?" Kamira shook her head kindly. "No, sweetheart. It's going to be a house, for people who need one." The girl looked confused. "But everyone has a house." Kamira's smile dimmed just slightly. "Not always. But we're working on changing that." The girl nodded like she understood, then pedaled off. Kamira turned to Lior. "Sometimes I forget how invisible this problem is until a kid says something simple like that." "It's invisible," he said, "because people in power want it to be." She exhaled. "Not anymore." Later that day, they returned to Brooklyn. Kamira stood in her living room, flipping through the day's mail when she saw the envelope. Cream-colored, heavy paper, wax seal, an invitation from Ashford Capital's board. She stared at it for a long moment, then opened it. Inside was an official request to attend a private forum for women in finance and philanthropy, hosted by the same investment firm that once paraded her name across their gala brochures like a branding tool. They wanted her to speak, to sit on a panel titled, "The New Faces of Quiet Power, Redefining Impact Beyond Wealth." She almost laughed. She hadn't spoken to anyone from Kieran's world in over a year. Not since the divorce settlement was finalized. Not since she walked away from the house, the name, the title. They didn't ask for a statement. They asked for a yes or no. That night, she sat on the couch with Lior, the invitation in her hand. He looked at the paper, then at her face. "You thinking of going?" Kamira shrugged. "Part of me wants to burn it. And the other part." She looked down. "Wants to walk in and say exactly what I wish I'd said years ago." Lior nodded slowly. "Then go. But only if it's for you, not for them. Not for closure. Not for payback." She met his eyes. "What if it's a little bit of all of that? Then make sure the part that's for you speaks the loudest." 2 days later, she confirmed her attendance. The venue was sleek, professional. Glass walls, marble floors, velvet ropes. Every woman in the room wore black or navy. All polished, all poised. Kamira wore a muted green dress with pockets and a high collar. No jewelry, no stylist, just confidence and calm. The panel was moderated by a former news anchor. When Kamira was introduced, her bio was short. Not a single word about Kieran. Only her work with the Wynn Foundation and the 3 buildings opened in less than 9 months. When the moderator asked her, "What motivated you to start this foundation after such a high-profile marriage?" Kamira answered plainly, "I lost something that I thought I'd earned, and I realized I hadn't protected myself legally, financially, or emotionally. I started this to make sure other women don't have to learn those lessons the hard way." The room went still. No applause, no gasps, just quiet absorption. She continued, I don't believe in shame as a teacher. I believe in structure, and in giving women the ability to walk away from unsafe places without having to beg for keys or sleep on couches. The questions came fast after that. How do you avoid burnout? Do you still believe in love? Do you ever miss the old life? Kamira took them one at a time. I rest when I need to. I lean on good people. And yes, I believe in love, but not the kind that trades affection for silence. When asked if she had a message for other women in power, she said, "Don't confuse being included with being protected." After the panel, 2 women approached her in the hallway. Both had been part of the same foundation board that once praised her presence and dismissed her concerns. One said, "You were incredible up there. I didn't know you had that in you." Kamira smiled politely. "It's always been in me. You just didn't ask." Then she walked away. Outside, Leo was waiting by the sidewalk, leaning against his car. When she reached him, he opened the door for her, then paused. "You okay?" Kamira exhaled. "Yeah. I think I finally said what I needed to say." He smiled and kissed her forehead. "Then let's go home." Kamira woke the next morning to sunlight pouring through the windows and the sound of quiet music drifting in from the kitchen. It wasn't the playlist she usually played. This was Leo's. Soulful, soft, guitar-heavy. Music with a heartbeat. She smiled before her eyes fully opened. Moments later, she padded into the kitchen barefoot, still in her robe, and found him slicing strawberries into a bowl of oatmeal like he'd always lived there. "You're an early riser," she said. He turned, gave her a look that said guilty, and grinned. "Habit." Even on weekends, she leaned on the counter, arms folded loosely. "You didn't have to make breakfast." "I know," he said, passing her the bowl, "but you've been making homes for people all week. Let someone feed you for once." She accepted the food, but the gesture meant more than just a meal. It was care. Unforced, uncomplicated. They ate at the table. No rush, no plans yet. Just warmth and small talk. Leo finally asked, "How did you feel after the panel yesterday?" Kamira paused. "Tired, but also clear. Regret? None," she said. "They heard me. I wasn't the accessory this time. I was the voice." He nodded. "I watched the live stream." "You didn't blink once." Kamira chuckled. "I've spent years learning how to hold back. I'm learning now how to stand firm." Later that day, they drove out to the Bronx to meet with the local neighborhood council. The newest property, the one with the original molding and crooked stairs, had passed inspection. And now they were hosting a small open house to introduce the community to the space. Kamira stood beside a few volunteers, watching as local families walked through. Some offered to help paint. A retired carpenter offered to fix the back gate. 2 teenage girls from the block asked if they could start a donation drive for bedding. Kamira's heart swelled at every offer. This wasn't just about funding anymore. It was community, ownership, pride. She stepped aside for a moment, taking it all in. That's when an older woman approached her, mid-60s, wore a green cardigan and a floral scarf. She held a cup of lemonade and walked with a quiet certainty. "You're Kamira, right?" the woman asked. "I am. I'm Eleanor. I used to live 3 houses down before the neighborhood changed. My sister was in a situation like this once, long ago. No one helped her. She never got out." Kamira listened closely. Eleanor looked toward the house. "What you're doing here, it matters. A lot." Kamira nodded, her voice soft. "Thank you. We're trying—" "No," Eleanor said firmly. "You're doing—" Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded envelope. "It's not much," she said, "but it's mine to give." Inside was a check, $200, written in neat script. Kamira's throat tightened. "I can't accept this." "You can," Eleanor said, "because I've waited 30 years to put that money somewhere that felt like justice." Kamira took the envelope carefully, like it was sacred. And in many ways it was. That evening, as the open house wrapped, Kamira and Leo walked through the empty unit once more. He paused in the kitchen, fingers grazing the counter. feels different when people are in it. It feels claimed, Kamira said. They stepped into the living room, where the last sliver of sun cut across the floor. Kamira turned to him. This is the life I never imagined, but the one I think I needed. He met her eyes. Because it's yours. They stood there, quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "Are you happy?" Lior nodded. "I am, even with all the unknowns." "Especially because of the unknowns," he said. "They make every decision feel earned." She reached for his hand. "I don't need you to promise forever." He looked at her with calm certainty. "I'm not here to make promises. I'm here to show up every day." Kamira leaned into him, her head on his shoulder, and in that simple closeness, she realized she'd built more than housing. She'd built peace. Later that night, as they drove back home, Kamira watched the skyline from the passenger seat. Lights flickered across buildings. Taxis darted. Life pulsed around them. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Mercy. "Need to talk when you can. It's good news. Big. Call me when you're home." Kamira texted back, "We'll call in 30. She turned to Lior. "Mercy's up to something. She always is." Back in the apartment, she called Mercy and put her on speaker. "What's going on?" Kamira asked. Mercy didn't waste time. "One of the city's private development firms saw your panel. They've got a vacant building in East Harlem. Old school, strong bones, 4 stories. They're offering it up for conversion. Said, 'It's yours if you want it.'" Kamira blinked. "You're serious? They want a tour this week." "You in?" Kamira looked at Lior. He raised his eyebrows. "Sounds like a sign." She turned back to the phone. "I'm in." After the call ended, Kamira sat on the edge of the bed, hands in her lap. Lior knelt in front of her. "You okay?" She smiled slowly. "I think I'm finally starting to believe this is real. That all of it, the fall, the silence, the rebuilding, it wasn't for nothing." "It never was," he said. She looked at him, voice low. "Then stay." He reached up, cupped her face gently. "I wasn't planning to leave." Kamira stood in front of the building in East Harlem 3 days later, her scarf whipping softly in the spring wind. 4 stories high, brick facade. A rusted school sign still hung crooked over the double-door entrance. The building had been empty for 5 years, but the structure stood tall, stubborn, like it had never wanted to be forgotten. She walked the perimeter with Mercy and a representative from the development firm. Lior trailed behind, camera slung over his shoulder to capture every angle for architectural plans. Inside, the scent of time clung to the walls, chalk, dust, old paper, and wood varnish. Lockers lined the hallways. Some still had names taped to them. A few had notes scrawled on the inside in permanent marker. "Don't forget you matter. Be better than him. Someday, this place won't feel so loud." Kamira touched one gently. The irony wasn't lost on her. A building once meant for learning would now become one for unlearning pain, for rewiring safety, for starting over. The developers wanted to hand over the property as part of a legacy investment initiative. No rent, no strings, just a public-private handshake deal with an agreement to report back on community impact. Mercy handled the fine print. Kamira focused on the vision. As they walked through each floor, she imagined not just rooms, but routines. Community dinners in the old cafeteria, therapy rooms in the old library, laughter echoing in former science labs turned play areas. She paused in the former principal's office and whispered, "This will be a place no one has to get permission to feel safe in." Lior stepped beside her. "You've got plans for all 4 floors, don't you?" "Every inch." After the site visit, they grabbed coffee at a small Dominican cafe nearby. Kamira stirred her tea slowly. "This building is bigger than anything we've done," she said. "It's a full transformation. You've already done the hardest part," Mercy said. "This is just the reward." Kamira shook her head. "The reward isn't the building. It's the women who walk in carrying nothing but a trash bag of clothes and leave with keys and confidence." Mercy raised her cup. "To that," Lior added, "to strong walls and open doors." That night, back in Brooklyn, Camira sat alone for a while. Leor had gone home to work on the structural layout sketches. Mercy had promised to finalize legal paperwork by morning. Camira flipped through the notebook she'd nearly filled. Pages of names, notes, layouts, quotes, ideas. On the last page, she wrote one sentence. I lost a house, but I found my foundation. Then she closed the book and exhaled. This wasn't the end, but it was something new. 2 days later, she stood in a quiet room on the second floor of the East Harlem building with a woman named Elise, the first resident selected for the new unit. Elise was 32. She had left a marriage where she wasn't allowed to have her own toothbrush, let alone a checking account. Camira handed her a folder. Inside, a key, a lease agreement with her name, a schedule of group support sessions, and a blank journal. What's this for? Elise asked, holding up the notebook. Camira smiled. Whatever you want it to be, a place to write what wasn't allowed before. Elise's eyes welled up. No one's ever trusted me to keep something. Camira reached out, gently placed her hand on Elise's. You don't have to earn safety, you already deserve it. The opening ceremony for the new East Harlem property was set for a month later, but word spread faster than expected. Local news wanted a story. One of the city's largest women's shelters asked for a tour. A senator's office requested a visit. Camira agreed to the first two. She wanted visibility, not noise. She also wanted the women moving in to have dignity, not flashbulbs in their faces. When the first floors cleaned and furnished, she walked through with Leor and sat in the wide corner room that used to be the guidance counselor's office. He pointed to the beams above. We can keep those exposed, run lighting along the top. She nodded. And this room could be a journaling center, quiet space, no devices. Leor smiled. You know you've just designed something no city has ever done before, right? I didn't want to fix a system, she said. I wanted to replace it. A soft knock interrupted Camira's thoughts. She looked up from her office inside the New Win Foundation building, a minimal, open space filled with natural light and framed photos of women who had completed the first recovery program cycle. Leor stepped in, holding a small brown envelope. Delivery came for you, he said, placing it on her desk. Camira raised a brow. No return name? Just your name. Handwritten. She opened it carefully. Inside was a card. No logo, no signature. Only 5 words. In blue ink, you were never replaceable. Ever. Camira stared at it. It was Kieran's handwriting. She didn't flinch. She closed the card, slipped it into her bottom drawer, and locked it. Then she turned back to Leor. I'm meeting with the second intake group at noon. Want to join? He nodded. Wouldn't miss it. They walked down together. In the elevator, he glanced at her. You okay? She smiled gently. I'm free. That's better than okay. Later that evening, as the building quieted and most staff had left, Camira and Leor sat on the rooftop. String lights stretched from one end to the other. A small table was set with 2 plates of lentil curry and flatbread from the Caribbean place around the corner. They'd made it a ritual. Thursday rooftop dinners. Camira leaned back in her chair, the city buzzing below but far enough away to feel peaceful. Did I tell you Mercy's expanding the legal wing of the foundation? She said. She's building a team. You built something that made her want to stay, Leor replied. Camira looked across the rooftop. I didn't think I'd ever feel this. Still. It used to feel like I had to hustle to earn peace. You earned it a long time ago, he said. Now you just get to live in it. After dinner, they stood near the edge, looking out over the East River. Camira turned toward him. Can I ask you something? Anything. If you were designing a home from scratch for someone who never thought they'd trust again, what would you put in it? Leor didn't hesitate. Windows that face the sunrise, a quiet reading corner, a back porch where nothing is urgent, and a bathroom with 2 sinks, because she deserves her own space. Camira smiled. He added, and a strong foundation. Not made of cement, made of choice. Because she gets to choose who walks through that front door, She didn't respond right away. Then softly, "Would you build that with me?" "I already started," he said. "The day I met you." 3 months later, the foundation hit its 6-month benchmark. Over 40 women had moved through the first cycle, 29 had permanent housing, 19 were in new jobs, and 5 had enrolled in school again. But Camira wasn't counting numbers. She counted stories. The mother who reconnected with her son, the woman who slept peacefully for the first time in 6 years, the 19-year-old who learned her opinion mattered. At the end of the year, Camira was asked to speak at a national summit on women's equity and housing justice. She didn't bring a speech. She walked up in a navy pantsuit, hair pinned in a low bun, and simply said, "I once had a house that looked perfect on the outside, but I didn't have a home inside myself. Now I do, and I want to help other women do the same." This foundation is not about rescue, it's about rebuilding, with dignity, with ownership, with voice. The room stood for her before she finished. That night, Leo picked her up from the venue. They didn't go out, they went home. A small townhouse with creaky floors, mismatched tiles, and a backyard that smelled like jasmine in the spring. She kicked off her shoes, curled into the couch, and pulled his arm around her waist. He kissed her temple. "Proud of you." She whispered, "Thank you for never asking me to become someone else." "You're everything," he said, "because you never stopped being you." Camira rested her head on his chest. She didn't need noise. She didn't need applause. She had herself. She had peace. And she had love that never asked her to shrink. You've been here with us through every quiet decision, every unspoken betrayal, every step. Camira took, not to fight fire with fire, but to walk away without burning herself. If her story held your attention, if it stirred something you've never said out loud, now's the time to say it. Because this wasn't just about a house. This wasn't about headlines, trends, or whose name had more weight. It was about what happens when someone takes your trust and tries to trade it like a chip on the table. It was about what you choose when life hands you public humiliation, and you decide to respond with private strength. Have you ever had to do that? Have you ever had to hold your tongue, pack your dignity in a small bag, and leave a life you built brick by brick because someone else threw it away for something cheaper? Have you ever had to smile through dinner parties while your gut screamed the truth? Have you ever heard whispers, ignored signs, waited for facts, and then watched them show up in your face like a wrecking ball? This story isn't just Camira's, it's yours too. So if you've ever been betrayed quietly, if someone tried to replace you like you were just furniture in a room they once loved, or if you were forced to rebuild, not for applause but for peace, then share your story below. Let this comment section be a space for those who chose silence, strength, and the long road back to themselves. What would your 4 words have been? Would you have walked away? Would you have gone public? Would you have fought to keep the house, or let it go to find your own home somewhere new? And here's the thing. People don't always understand what it costs to walk away with class, to not drag someone, to not scream, to not hit back when you're handed betrayal. But maybe you didn't need to, because maybe the loudest revenge is healing without noise. Camira built something from the rubble, not out of spite, but out of purpose. She turned her pain into power, yes, but more importantly, she turned her heartbreak into help. And that's what makes this story unforgettable. So if it meant something to you, like really meant something, do this. Tap the like button. It tells the platform this story deserves to be seen by more people who need it. Hit subscribe, because here at Mr. Charles Stories, we don't just tell stories, we speak truth to silence. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe a friend who is holding back tears, trying to start over, trying not to fall apart. Because sometimes, all it takes is one story, one moment of Me Too, one reason to keep going. We're building something here, a space where stories hold power, where the quiet ones get their voice back. So join us, comment, connect, stay. We've got more stories and more strength coming your way. And always remember, You don't have to scream to be heard. You don't have to fight to win. You don't have to stay where you're not honored. Sometimes, walking away is the victory. This has been Mr. Charles Stories, and we'll see you in the next one.